Morning, church. Morning. It's good to see you today. I want to celebrate something with you real quick and keep it at the forefront as we talk about things. Yesterday afternoon, we had a wedding right here in this place, right here, and a couple in our church, Tyler and Shelby, and their last name is Lutz now collectively. Okay, like she had a different name until about 3:30 yesterday, and so in that, celebrate that. They decided to be married, and they got married, had a cool, great time. I want to tell you, if you're thinking about getting married at like 3 in the afternoon or something. Like, that's a good thing for me. I'm going to tell you that's selfish, right? Because I get to go hang out at the reception and afterwards. Like, that's a good thing. And we have these nighttime weddings, which are all cool and dark. And then people are like, you want to come to the reception? And I'm like, you're not coming to church the next day, are you? Like, I have to be there, right? So, if you see them around, tell them congratulations. I want to tell you what's very encouraging about it is sometimes, and I can share this with you, and I hope you get this, is that sometimes people want to be married in the church, but they really don't want Jesus involved. Can I put it that way? And somebody go, yeah, I get it, right? There's other people who want to get married, and they don't care if it's in the church, on the sidewalk, in the landfill, wherever it's at, but they want God to be the center of that, not just them, but their relationship. And so I think those are the marriages and those relationships that start that Satan isn't a big fan of, right? And so Tyler and Shelby's is one of those relationships that they said we want Christ to be the center of what we do in our wedding and our life moving forward. So I'm asking you to pray for them this week in that, and just celebrate that. We want to celebrate things that God says is good, and God says marriage between husband and wife is what he ordained in the beginning. So that's a very cool thing. So if you see them around or you see them on Facebook or whatever, like their page. Also, I want to encourage you, if you go to weddings, go to the reception. All right, go do that, right? Some of you I know, because we know how it works, is that there's like 10 times more people at the reception than the wedding, right? Because you're like, I don't have to really do much at the reception except have fun, right? But last night at the reception, it was pretty cool. Had some good deals, and we had to leave a little earlier because we had little kids that didn't get naps. And if you know, as a parent, if you don't have a nap, your day's over. Okay, that's the way it works. But last night you had a little guy, awesome. He did the whip and nay. You know what that? You know what that is? Some are like, I don't know what that is. Ask your neighbor. All right, ask your neighbor. He's not even one yet. His mom helped him do it. It was awesome. It was pretty good, right? And the cool thing I love about going to wedding receptions is everyone thinks they can dance, right? Like, everyone thinks they can dance. And I can promise you this, none of us can. There's like a less than 1% who can dance, but when music starts, everyone thinks they can dance, right? So that's where they came up with that television show, right? So you think you can dance, right? So I just want to tell you that if you have a chance to go to weddings, like, go. And if you have a chance to go to wedding receptions, go. Like, Jesus went to a wedding party and blew it up, right? It was good stuff. So celebrate things that God says is good. This morning, church, we're going to be continuing in our message series of Humble and Hungry. We've been laying the groundwork the last few weeks, starting with a parable that Jesus taught, and then going to the back end of Ephesians as we look at what Paul says to the church in Ephesus. And as we've been laying that groundwork, there's a couple of things we've looked at already, is that our attitude of how we engage God in our prayer might be a radar of where our heart's at in humility, right? Because we looked at this parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector, remember in week 1, is that they went to the temple to pray, and the Pharisee basically said, thank God I'm not like him, right? And the tax collector couldn't even look up to heaven. It says he beat his breast and just was repenting of who he was and what he had done. So that's kind of the foundational deal, is when we look at this idea of humble and hungry. Humility is the condition of the heart. It's how we view our position with God. And also humility can affect our relationships with others. If you've ever been around someone who's like uber arrogant, you can almost smell them coming, right? You get that? And some of you go, well, that's not me. Well, if you say you don't have a problem with humility, that might be us, right? And so as we look at that, these are kind of foundational. This humility is foundational to our walk with Christ and our walk with others. Is understanding that God is God and He's good at being God. We don't need to be God, right? And when we try to be God in some way, we begin not being humble. And so last week we looked at Ephesians 4 where it says, be humble and gentle in everything, right? Always to everyone. And that's a tough thing, because the reality is, as we saw last week, is that everything and everyone kind of doesn't leave a loophole, right? It means in everything we do, be gentle and humble. And so if we're called to be that, we're continuing in that journey today as we look to Ephesians 4. See, Paul, in this letter, we need to set this up again for those who may be mixed, is the church in Ephesus is kind of in a cultural conundrum, if you will, right? Is that Rome, it's the third largest city in the Roman Empire at the time, and basically it's everything kind of goes, but we're not going to tell anyone that they're wrong, right? And so we just kind of took on the culture, or coming out of the culture into the church, is that they had a plethora of gods and having one God, and now the church is struggling with going back to the way they were or what they knew before Christ, and now trying to live in Christ. And so as Paul writes this to the church in Ephesus, he's reminding them of how they are to be a representation of Christ and why, right? We all want to know why. If I tell you you should do this, your natural reaction should be this. Why, right? It should be. Growing up, I had, my mom in the 80s got into this direct sales deal, right? Maybe some of you have heard these things, a term called Avon. Do you remember Avon? You guys remember Avon? Some of you are like, I still buy from it. It's okay, it's all right, right? There was Avon, and then there was home interior parties. Do you remember those? Some of you women are nodding your head. Other men are like, my checkbook still speaks that we know what that is, right? And my mom got into these things, and she didn't really do a lot of the sales of it, but she'd go to parties all the time. Like, people would invite them in. And so what would happen with Avon, the Avon lady would come to our house, and I was okay with it when I was little because she always had to sample things, right? Like, you got free things from her. I know it seems really weird, but it was cool to get little samples of musk cologne when you're little, right? Because you think you're supposed to wear it because that's what guys, adults do. It smelled like bug spray in hindsight, right? But the home interior deal affected me a little bit more negatively than Avon did. Is that my mom went to this home interior party one time and came home with decorations for my room. All right? Parents, I want to tell you this. If you're going to decorate your kids' room, just ask what's scary to them. That's the first thing you do. All right? And so she came home with all the decor you can imagine for clowns. Right? So in the corner of my room, I had 4 statues of a clown family that were ceramic, right? They're in the corner, right? And on the wall, I had a clown clock. And it wasn't just the clown clock, but every time the hours would strike an hour, its eyes would go do, 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 like this. I had a clown bedspread. I had a clown lamp, right? So, but in the daytime, it was beautiful. But at night, ugh, not good. Right? And now maybe I forgot to mention this. During this time around then is this, remember the horror movie called It? Do you remember this? The bad guy in that movie was a what? Clown, right? I'm not supposed to be watching such movies, but it came out on VHS, and my parents were watching one night, and I rolled over on the couch. And right what I saw is, if you've ever seen the movie, I don't recommend it, but if you did, he looks out of the sewer like this, right? And all you see is the clown. And so every time I would go to bed, I would lay there, and what did I see? Clowns. I had explained to my mom that this is freaky. Like, this is not good. We need to get the clowns out of my room. I remember sleeping under my covers, sweating to death, because I did not want to open my eyes and see the clowns. And some of you are laughing, but the truth is, you know what that's kind of like, right? When you have something there that's off. But the thing that I remember the most out of all of it, it wasn't that it was really that freaky. It's that I was okay with it during the day. Right? Like when it was light, I'd go in and I thought it was creepy because it was kind of like the taxidermy deer. They could look at you in any position you're in, right? The clowns. But the truth is that I was okay with it when it was light. But when it got dark and it was time to go to bed, there was something about what was okay in the light wasn't okay in the dark. You see, darkness in the Scripture is always associated with the state of someone or something before God makes it good. It's always associated with a life before they submit to God. It talks about living in darkness. There's like a correlation there. When we hear of light and we hear of darkness, darkness is never associated with God. Light is always associated with God. And so today, as we look at what Paul begins to write to them, we're going to see this in a minute. See, in Genesis 1, 3, and 4, it says, then God said, let there be what? Light. And then there was light. God dedicated a whole day of creation to making there be light and darkness, day and night. But even in the night, what did he hang in the sky? Moons and stars for there to be light, right? I used to go hunting with my dad, and I don't know why this is, but you apparently have to go hunting when it's dark outside in the morning, right? To get up in the tree in time. And there was something about walking in the woods when it was dark at 4 in the morning that wasn't overly intriguing to me. And he'd be like, you're fine, you have a flashlight. I'm not really worried about the flashlight, Dad. It's what comes out of the bushes in the dark, right? See, God has intended for light to be good and darkness to be bad. We even see it in the crucifixion of Jesus in Mark 15. It says right before the crucifixion of Jesus, it was dark all across the land for 3 hours. And it says some people were a little freaked out by that, right? If at noon in the daytime it just goes dark, it would probably make news headlines because it's supposed to be light. You see, as we get into this scripture today, we want to see this, is that there is something about dark that God has used to emphasize bad. The same should be true about us in our spiritual walk with Christ. We should be able to see the difference or radar between dark and light, bad and good. And Paul's writing this church in Ephesus to help them see that because they're having a problem with that, right? They're seeing and saying, well, culture is this and culture is saying this, and now culture is even in the church, and well, if it doesn't hurt anybody, it can't be that bad, right? And Paul says, no, there's lightness and there's darkness. See, start Ephesians 5:8, it says this, for you were once in darkness, but now you are light in the Lord. Live as children of light. Isn't that interesting? That Paul says there was once you were living in darkness. Like you had blinders on. You didn't get the fact of how good light could be. But now you're supposed to be, now when you come to know Christ, you're in light. You're supposed to live as children of light. And see, that's something I think the church probably needs to hear sometimes. It's what I need to hear a lot of times. Is that I'm supposed to be different and look different, smell different, and taste different than I did before I knew Jesus. Right, church? And Paul shares that with them. See, there is a tension there, because he doesn't say that darkness is just bad. He attaches a directive for believers. He doesn't just say, you once were in darkness and now you're in light. He leads it with this. He says, now live as children of light. So that's the command that he gives us, and we have to ask ourselves today, what does that mean? What does that mean in the context of being humble? See, the tension that lies there when we try to live as children of light is that we sometimes struggle, is this fair, church, to say that that's our responsibility, right? Is that I've heard many people say things like this, well, you know, I'm trying. I'm trying. See, trying doesn't depend on who? God. Trying depends on us. But we have a responsibility to pursue the heart and the will of God so that we can live as children of light. And why is that tension so thick? It's because living in light is against our human nature. It's the same tension that Adam and Eve had. It's the same tension that the church in Ephesus is living in the Scripture. It's the same tension we live in today. This week, our little guy in our house, he's 3.5 now. Now we have another little girl who's with us now about 16 months. And I'd come home for lunch, and I was in the dining room talking to my wife, and all of a sudden we heard the little girl go, eh! Like kind of that, like more of like, this ain't good, like something happened. Wasn't crying, but just angry. My wife goes out there, and our little guy, you have to laugh at this, like give him credit, like he's trying. Julia says, what happened? What happened to her? He says, the daddy long leg in that cupboard just bit her finger. Right? Okay? Alright, now you have to understand, we're getting a little science lesson here. Daddy long legs don't bite you, okay? That's the first thing. Secondly, it was our food pantry cupboard, alright? Now granted, we do have problems with spiders a lot of times before we spray, but his story is the reason there's a bite mark on the end of her finger is because there was a spider that bit her. Right?